space update, open space and recreation plan update. So what I'd like to do tonight is to go over quickly sort of a review, sort of why we want to do an open space plan, why we want to update it, what our last open space plan had, and then spend most of the time talking about the survey results that we got back from townwide survey, and review some of the mapping and see what we can, if there's any input that the community would like to put in terms of where we should focus our priorities over the next 7 years. So with that, we'll get going. First of all, why an open space and recreation plan? Obviously, open space, I'm sorry, I've got some slides to share with you too, so if you need to crane your neck, I apologize, but this is probably going to be the best way to see the mapping that we'll be looking at and the survey results that we'll be looking at after. Obviously, our open space and recreation assets are significant capital investments in town. They're really important for our long-term quality of life and property values in town. And most of all, an approved open space and recreation plan qualifies the town for significant reimbursement through state grant programs. So there's a variety of different grants that are available for open space and recreation, not just acquisitions, but improvements also to those infrastructures. So rather than laying out a whole bunch of money on our own, we can take advantage of significant amounts of state resources that are available if we have an approved open space and recreation plan. Our last open space and recreation plan was filed in 2011 and was approved for a 5-year term, so it actually expired in 2016. It opens us up for a variety of different grant programs, which I outline on this slide here. And you can see we have a long history of receiving grants through this grant program. Most of our conservation land in particular in town has been acquired with the assistance of these grant programs. With an expired plan, that means we're not currently eligible for those grants. And the good news is the state recently extended their approval dates so that we can, when we get this plan approved, we'll actually be approved for 7 years rather than 5. So it's a slightly longer period. And you can see significant reimbursement rates, 64% reimbursement on the land grant program for a maximum of $400,000. You might remember with the Lane acquisition we did several years ago, we took full advantage of this grant program and we're able to acquire that property for pennies on the dollar. So I apologize for the small print here, but this is just a quick synopsis of what our last open space plan laid out for its primary objectives. So maintaining rural character, enhancing and improving existing open space and recreation assets, and providing new open space and recreation opportunities. And you can see on the map on the right, it's very, at this scale, very granular, but the key here is we identified large swaths of town that were priorities for open space conservation and recreation opportunities. The bluish color there on the map is for scenic and agricultural protection, and then that light yellowish greenish color on the northern tier of town was for habitat and open space conservation for outdoor recreation. So those were the primary objectives and sort of the acquisition priority categories that we had identified in the last plan. And that's sort of what we're aiming to get to in this plan. We want to have the same sort of bulleted list of achievable goals and identified priorities graphically laid out. And we had significant amounts of accomplishments from the last open space plan. Obviously, we passed the right to farm bylaw. We established an agricultural commission. We established a Chapter 61 withdrawal notice process and protocol. We established open space acquisition criteria. And then, of course, the Lane property acquisition, which we received a significant amount of state grants for. Some of the things we achieved without getting any assistance from state grants are listed there as well. So you can see there are things that we could be taking advantage of these grant programs, and we haven't in most recent history. So having an updated plan would benefit these things. So we got together starting in May to begin the process of updating the open space plan, and we've been going through it section by section and updating all of the information we had. And one of the first things we wanted to get done is to update the information we received from the public. So this meeting is one of those efforts, but we also sent almost 4,900 surveys out with all of the tax bills back in June, I think it was. We also had the same survey on SurveyMonkey. We had electronic copies available on a website, hard copies available at Town Hall, and in total we got 438 responses back. That's actually very good. A good survey results are about in the 3% range. That's what you can expect. This is like 7.5, 8. So we're pretty happy with the survey results that we got in return. And so quickly, what I'd like to do is go over some of the sort of key take-home messages that we learned from the survey results. The different colors on the bars there represent the length of time people have lived in town. So blue at the bottom of those stacks, they've lived in town for 0 to 5 years. The orange is 5 to 10. Green is 10 to 40. Purple is lifelong residents. And then there's sort of a light blue at the very top for some folks who didn't respond to that part of the question. And this is mostly just interesting to see so you can understand kind of who was responding to the survey. And this in particular question was asking, why do people live in Lunenburg? Clearly, the rural atmosphere and good schools are the drivers. The measuring stick here is 70%, the percent of respondents, total respondents, are what's calculated there. So you can see over 70% of the respondents said that the rural atmosphere was an important reason why they live here. And good schools, nearly 40% of the respondents. What new recreation areas are needed and what improvements to existing recreation facilities are needed? Again, this is characterized by years of residency. And you can see trail maps on the far right, hiking and skiing trails, again on the far right, conservation areas, bike trails and lanes, beach improvements, nature center facility. These are some of the top vote getters, and these are in the 30, the highest vote getters here are in the 35% range. Who is in most need of additional recreational resources? Adults and seniors, the highest scorers in this category at over 40%. What residents would do for open space and recreation? We asked them if, how important is it to you, and what would you do personally to support open space and recreation in town? Voting for zoning changes, voting to support town acquisition, voting to adopt the Community Preservation Act, all high vote getters. The lower votes on the other is donating money or land, restricting your own property, selling your own property at a bargain price. Obviously most people aren't large landholding landowners in town, so it's not really a good opportunity for most people. We also asked what the best way it is to communicate recreational opportunities to residents. And this was just sort of generally interesting. I don't know how much this impacts our open space and recreation plan, but we wanted to be able to know what the best way to communicate is with residents, and other municipal boards actually might find this interesting as well in terms of how people responded to this question. This is dense, but this is a measure of what recreational resources residents use in town. And we actually consolidated this data in two different ways. So this slide and the next slide, again, this is stacked by years of residency. And you can see the public library, the pick your own produce and farmers markets, town conservation trails and lands. Let's see, what else? Boating, existing sidewalks. The highest vote getters here, the public library touching over 80% of the respondents. That's huge. Town conservation lands, nearly 60%. Pick your own produce farmers markets, almost 65% of the respondents. Existing sidewalks and paths, over 50%. So people are out there, people are recreating. The interesting comparison here is how many times per year people use these resources. The blue is 1 to 5 times per year. The red is more than 5 times per year. So you can see the pick your own produce and farmers market scores a very high percentage of folks use it, but they don't use it very often. Whereas the public library, people use it a lot, and they use it over and over and over again. And it's just an interesting way to compare these two data sets, I think, in terms of the amount of use. The existing sidewalks and paths is a great example where the people who do use them regularly use them all the time. Town conservation land, sort of 50-50 there. So with that, what I'd like to do now is just to go over briefly our maps, what we've got for maps so far. And I will ask you to bear with us because there is a lot of information here. And what I'd ask you to do when you're looking at this information is to start seeing if you can see any trends, any overlaps, what information, where are the obvious priorities. And to me, when I start thumbing through these maps, I see some things start jumping out at me. And hopefully folks will see the same thing. This is just our zoning map for town. We'll start here with our geological resources. I apologize for this. I'm going to fit visible. Nope. I'm going to fit width. Nope. Just do this. So this is geological resources. This is interesting because it's showing, first of all, the different colors here. The thick till is this brownish color. There are post-glacial deposits here. The alluvium and the alluvium, excuse me, are these hatch marks like in here. And the sand and till, the coarse glacial till, are these orange colors. What's interesting when you look at this type of geological mapping of town, and then you look at drinking water resources, again, we'll zoom out. The greens here are aquifers, so you can see our water supply wells are in and along existing aquifers. These dark triangles are our water supply wells in town. The pink colors are our water supply protection areas, and these greens are drinking water supply high yield aquifers, and the purples are non-drinking water high yield aquifers. So again, if you're to look at geological versus drinking water, you can see the overlap. Let's look at FEMA flood zones. you'll see similar types of patterns for the water resources for FEMA flood zones. And then when you look at the water resources maps, the various colors here are subbasins. Mulpus Brook is this blue, Catacoonamog is this pink, the Falula and Baker Brook is this green in here, and I believe this is Squanicook, and this orange up in here. But again, you can see our water resources and wetlands are following the same patterns. Let's see, we have significant wildlife resources. This map has our highest priority wildlife habitats. The Department of Fish and Game, Natural Heritage, and Endangered Species Program put together what they called Biomap program, where they compiled a whole bunch of different types of habitat information. Those are the light and dark greens that are shown on this map, are core and supporting natural landscapes. The pink cross-hatched areas are areas of critical environmental concern. The other hatch marks, which are overlaying each other, you can see there's kind of layer upon layer of prioritized habitat in the same location, which makes it a little, which sort of says, here's the target, here's the bullseye, in terms of habitat protection. It's pretty clear that the northeast corner of town, northwest corner of town, and that northern central tier are very important for wildlife habitats, and as is the backside of Massapog Pond.
Can I ask you to zoom in?
Sure, whereabouts?
In this area over here. Sorry. Just trying to see where the Robs Hill area is.
Robs Hill is here.
So is that when you put this map together, what is the different colors and hatch marks mean?
So you have here, you have, let's see, you've got biomap core habitat. You've got natural heritage and endangered species priority habitats for rare species. You've got areas of critical environmental concern. You've got a whole host of potential and certified vernal pools. There are no cold water fisheries, which are the dark blue, as there aren't any major streams that are going through there. So there's lots of overlap there, lots of important habitats there.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys make this map, or is this from the Oliver GIS?
I made the maps, but it's using the Oliver GIS data. Any other questions on this map? Yep. Unique and scenic resources. It's kind of remarkable that we don't have a very good scenic inventory. That the data here that's in the pink and purples hatched are areas that were identified in, I want to say, 1982 was a statewide scenic inventory, and that's the last time a statewide scenic inventory was done. What we also have shown on here in the yellow are our designated scenic roads. Mm-hmm. So we have Flat Hill Road, Lancaster Ave, Leominster Road, and Northfield Road are designated scenic areas. And then we've also identified, water views across our various ponds, the pastoral vistas across our agricultural landscapes, our wetland views across Cowdrey and other various places in town, and then of course large blocks of conservation land as some of the scenic resources. Agriculture, something that was identified in the last plan, is very important. these are our agriculturally significant soils. So if you were to compare these maps again with the soils maps and the geological resources maps, you'll see a lot of overlap. This is the geological map. And these are our agricultural soils. Historic resources.
I have a question, Brandon.
Yeah, sure thing.
The agricultural soils don't necessarily tell you where the farms are, even though they are agriculturally significant soils. Do we have any farms maps? Any maps that just indicate where there are farms?
So we have, yes,
Cool.
but it's going to be imperfect.
Uh-huh.
As I'm sure Matt can attest, there's a lot of small farms that are present in town that maybe aren't necessarily in Chapter 61A, that aren't necessarily agricultural preservation restricted in town. This map shows, this is our land inventory map. And I would put an asterisk on this map that this is still incomplete. There's some more information that I'm working on updating on this one. The farm question, the dark brown hatched are our agricultural preservation restrictions in town. You can see that we actually have a fair amount of protected farmland in town, permanently protected. So agricultural preservation restrictions are permanent deed restrictions that are purchased from farms by the state of Massachusetts under the Department of Agricultural Resources. So these are permanently protected farmlands. You can see along Lancaster Ave, Leominster Road, and several other properties sort of in the central and southern part of town are permanently conserved. The orange color, where those brown hatch marks don't exist, are other Chapter 61A enrolled properties. So these are properties that are enrolled in agriculture as a current use. Chapter 61 programs, there's 61, which is forestry, 61A, which is agriculture, 61B, which is generally open space, allow landowners who fit certain criteria to enroll in a current use property tax program that provides a certain amount of property tax shelter for owning such large properties and maintaining them as privately owned open space. In return, what the town gets for Chapter 61 enrollment and getting those reduced property taxes on those properties is the town gets a right of first refusal on those properties should they ever be converted to another use. So we occasionally receive notice that a landowner wants to take their property out of Chapter 61. They want to convert it to some other use. You may remember the Arrow Farm from a number of years ago was removed from Chapter 61A, and the town was trying to acquire that property through the Chapter 61 withdrawal process. So Flat Hill Orchard is a good example. Chapter 61A enrolled, but not permanently conserved.
What's the olive green?
The olive green is town conservation land. So here's the Cowdrey here. Largetown Forest is the Lane property as we acquired. Robb's Hill is here. This is actually, and then there's green hatched marked properties in town which have conservation restrictions on it. Conservation restrictions like agricultural preservation restrictions are permanent deed restrictions on the property that allow the land to be permanently conserved and continue to be owned. It just happens to be in our town, most of our conservation restricted lands are either publicly owned, which is the case at Hunting Hills and the Hawes property up on Hollis Hill, And then there's the property that's now owned by North County Land Trust, and they actually originally held the conservation restriction over this property. This is the Peabody Conservation Area. And they recently took ownership of that property and gave the conservation restriction to the town. So the town holds the conservation restriction there. Our good friend Rich Brockelman here has a conservation restriction over his and Helen's property held by the trustees of reservations here. And interestingly, the town of Shirley holds a conservation restriction over a portion of land at Robb's Hill. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of farms, but this does show, this inventory does show protected farmland and currently enrolled
Yeah.
farmland.
So it wouldn't be far if we wanted to do something, if the Ag Commission wanted to do something along with the Business Association to put something together
That'd be fabulous.
to
Yeah.
promote local farms.
And if we wanted to get something like that into this plan, that'd be
Yeah.
easy enough. You know,
Yeah.
take this map,
Yeah,
draw some points on it and label what farm is what. and-
like a trail map for people who are interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Local foraging map.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we have, you know, obviously we've got the sewer map in town, for town. These are the areas that are approved, not necessarily sewered, but they are approved for sewer. And I think I covered pretty much, oh, the historic map, we were just about to get to that. These are the historic resources in town. This is a little hard to see, so I'll just zoom in. Obviously, we've got the historic center district in town, and then the various blue dots have been inventoried by the Mass Historic Commission. So these are various historic inventory points.
Do we have a map that shows active recreation sites, you know, like ball fields, soccer fields, that kind of thing?
So, believe it or not, that is here. So recreation is the blue colors. So Marshall Park obviously stands out because that is our largest park facility. You've got McNally and Wallace Park down in this area in the Whalum district. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. So Wallace, McNally.
But not Town Beach, no?
Town Beach is there, believe it
Okay,
or not.
Yeah.
It's just impossible to see, it's so small.
Yeah.
And, you know, what I envision on the land inventory is, I think this, for the plans purposes, will deserve having the town broken into at least quadrants, so that we can zoom in a little bit more and label some things.
Cool.
So at this scale, it's hard to really see it. And one thing that maybe isn't as apparent here are the parcels in this teal color are owned as general municipal land. So even though the Woodruff property here, for example, is a good example. We've got this large piece of property right off the center of town, was acquired. We spent a lot of money on it. And it's actually technically owned as general municipal land. It's not held as conservation land, even though I think most people think it is conservation land. It's not under the care and control of the Conservation Commission. Whereas this property just next to it is under the care and control of the Conservation Commission at the top of, actually that's down in the valley there. The property that you're familiar with, Dave, down there off West Street.
Yep. Bama House.
Was conservation, school property and was converted to general municipal property.
Yes.
Be fantastic land to have as conservation land. It's not managed as such. another piece off of Pleasant Street that was acquired from Twin City Baptist, some large agricultural fields near where the solar
Yep.
development was planned,
Yep.
is general municipal land. So, and there's a whole bunch of little lots scattered throughout the town, which are like that. And this is part of what I'd like to update, is there's quite a number of others that are in town that are general municipal, that are all these little lots. Some of them might make very nice pocket parks. Some of them might make perfect sense to sell and convert to general funds. So,
You showed a map before this one that was the historical commission.
Mhm.
Is that beige tan, is that just the historical district in the center of town?
let me go back to
It
historic.
is, the ones marked in blue, yeah.
Yes,
Is that the-
so the red outline here is the historic district, correct? And then the red dots are those that were are part of the historic district registry. Yeah.
Is that from the red book?
This is from Mass Historics data.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are all National Register
Places.
places and densities, so.
It seems like the light blue stuff is the stuff that still needs to be updated
There's some more work to be done on the light blue stuff.
through the parcels.
Yeah, so I've got maybe 30 or 40 parcels that need
Figuring out,
out.
okay.
And they're showing in the assessor's data as general municipal land.
Yeah,
Most of them were probably taken for tax title.
so to update those, do we need to go to, I mean, I'm
would think-
just confused on how we.
So there have been a handful of acquisitions that have happened since 2011 that came into the Conservation Commission's ownership.
Okay.
I need to take the subset of those that are those acquisitions and update that. The rest is simply going to be classified as general municipal because that's how it's assessed.
That sounds, yeah.
So, and then I think a reasonable action item for the plan is to take a good hard look at what we have as a portfolio of general municipally owned property and come up with some plans for it. You know, places like the West Street property maybe should be converted to the Care and Control Conservation Commission. There may be, there may be other parcels with other futures. You know, so having a good hard look at what we have in that inventory, I think, is a smart thing to do. So with that, I think that pretty much covers everything we know to date. And so I'd love to open it up to the floor to see if folks have any interest in or ideas or thoughts about how we should move forward. Yeah.
Could I just note that, to be clear, we don't have authority to
Yes.
get rid of any of the properties,
No, right.
right? We just make recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
Yeah.
the open space plan, I should have said at the outset, the open space ad hoc advisory committee is exactly that. We're an ad hoc advisory committee to the planning board. We have no authority. And so the plan we're producing really is meant to be a town plan that the town can then use. So what we'd like to do is identify sort of global priorities and come up with a strategy, and then hopefully folks will take that information and work on implementing it one way or another. So, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I'd really love to see the conversation about this municipal land and make sure the spaces that should be in conservation, we can get them in conservation. And I love what you said about the pocket parks, and it'd be good to identify some of the more walkable areas in town. If we have any pieces of property that could be pocket parks and contribute to those areas, I think that'd be great for open space and recreation.
Great. I agree. You know, we had one of the maps we don't have up here yet, but it's one that we will be producing because it came through loud and clear in a lot of the comments sections of the survey results, is the importance of the sidewalks. Is, you know, we've got a vibrant town center, and we've got another very strong, vibrant population dense area in the Whalum district. And both of those areas have a lot of sidewalks. And, we talked about the potential for community gardens in some of those locations where people are living on much smaller parcels of land and maybe would want to take advantage of community gardens. We might have some room on some of those types of parcels in those areas to do that kind of thing. But again, identifying where the sidewalks are, where the walkable areas are. I know I live on rolling acres, and I have a half a dozen different walking trails that I take, through town that take me on recreation area lands, on conservation lands, and on sidewalks through town, and having a network that people could say, oh, I could go for a walk here, or I could go for a bike ride, So a biking map and a walking map that integrates sidewalks, hiking trails, recreation areas, pocket parks, all that stuff, I think is a really smart thing to do and would be a great action item coming out of this plan. Anybody else? Yeah, Dave.
There's been a little discussion in the past couple of weeks about Marshall Park on Facebook, and growing up in that neighborhood, I truly hope that we take a long, hard look at the opportunities there and the need to bring that park back to what it was in the 50s and 60s. There is even more opportunity there than we've ever taken advantage of. We've got baseball fields, but we've got other land there that has multiple uses that we really need to develop and tie that into a center district project that revitalizes the entire section.
I love to hear you saying that because that's what we've been talking about in our meetings as well. That's come through really loud and clear in the survey results. Again, going back to the comments sections, there was an open-ended comments piece in the survey that we didn't have time to summarize for this meeting.
The other comment I'd like to make is that Marshall Park back in the 50s and 60s, as I was growing up, was a park that was available to the general public 24/7 pretty much. After dark, back in the 60s, you could go in there after dark and there weren't issues. Nowadays, sun up to sundown. But that was
Thanks to the 60s.
But it was available for use. You could play kickball, you could play a scrimmage baseball game, softball game, whatever you wanted to do. Sports in town, organized sports have gotten so busy that they've more or less taken over the part of the park that's been maintained, and the rest of it has been allowed to deteriorate. And I think that really, and I know there's a couple of different boards already looking at that, that reappropriating the space that has been taken care of with the needs presently versus what we needed 25, 30 years ago, but also expand into these areas that are now overgrown, because there's all kinds of opportunities there.
Yeah, in conversations, I was surprised to find out that there's possibly a quarter-mile track there, a walking track. There's tennis courts, basketball courts.
It's a cinder track.
Yeah, but all stuff we could work with. I mean, the space is there. It's been there before. It's a revitalization project. So
And it's walkable.
yeah,
That's what's so great about it,
Yeah.
right? Is it?
and it's
That's
central.
right. I mean, the seniors from the senior center, you can get there reasonably easily.
Great space. I'd
Yeah.
love to see it come back.
It's really fantastic. So, yeah, Darren.
I would also comment also about the northern part of town. I'm here just with concern of, let's see, the properties being sold for commercial development or housing development. I'm looking to see what strategies to protect some of those parcels. One of them that we've done very well in this town is to make use farms. So, I see the strategy of converting into farms, tree farms, Christmas tree farms, general farms. That's one strategy. The other one, a few folks of us are talking about cross-town trails to connect the regional towns. I'm just wondering how that might be working with the plan of advocating for a cross-town trail
Well, that certainly sounds like that's in keeping with what you were talking about, Dave, with the, with walking networks and, and so a more of a regional look, I think, could easily be integrated into that.
I think we're pushing the town's been pushing the chapter land, holding it in chapter land, which is a big part of that, because the more large block owners that do that, right away you realize that they're willing to, work with you. So I think if, with the new business group that you're heading up, and more conversations everybody has, communicating with each other, I think we can head that way. So.
Yeah.
So, I came in here because, with the Robbins Hill, is there a plan in terms of bringing, making the community also more accessible to outside communities? Because, those of us who do use Calgary, Robbins Hill, community, they shop here or whatever.
I think on a couple of different levels we're working on that. There is the business group, which we just had. Was that founded? That was all funded by a grant, I believe, right, to get that going?
Someone chose this regional plan commission is helping.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got a grant for that, and then they're talking about. We put out a survey to see if people were interested. What parts of, what do you call that? Becoming a destination, a recreational. I forget what it's called. Yeah, recreational destination town. And a lot of people were in favor of that. So where the marketing aspect of that goes, I'm not sure yet, but they're working on that. They're working on the trail maps. So once they get the trail maps together, they're also talking about, where we were talking about what areas in the commercial district, you could sort of link to those things. But there's still a lot of questions about the trains that come in down in the southeast corner, whether or not there's going to be a commuter rail in there at some point, So there's a lot of what ifs, Sorry.
Just one other thought that I've had for a while. You talked about, kind of biotourism thing.
But yeah, that's tourism. Thank you.
I thought might be interesting to think about possibly some zoning changes or exceptions at trailheads or something. For instance, near the Calgary entrance, maybe if you have a coffee shop or something like that could draw people in and be a
Exactly.
good way to get people into the conservation land and
Yeah.
things that, not a crazy commercial district next to a nice recreational area. I'm not saying that. But some type of limited thing that would be a good bookend to get people to use those areas.
Excellent idea. Yep.
So just to bounce off of that, the conservation communities on logging Calgary, logging Ross Hill, they've already logged small town, they're looking to log all the land. And if you go to small town, which is what where I live, Ross Hill, it's devastating. It makes it useless for recreation. And, looking at it from a high point of, people have had drone pictures taken, it's gone for recreation unless it's winter where the snowmobiles can go or maybe skiers. But there's no more. There's no value, there's no beauty left in it. There's not enough beauty left in it. If you take all the conservation areas and do that, you're not going to attract a lot of people. So that's what our big concern is with that. And
The flip side of that coin, I would say, is that if you don't manage the woodlands, that you'll end up with as much of a mess over time.
I've been there for, almost 30 years.
The white pine, the issues that are happening with white pine right now, with hemlock right now, are things that haven't been there for 30 years.
We have
They're
3
new
hemlock
problems.
trees in our area.
No, I know, but these are the things that can really devastate an area.
I do want to say that I've been proactive in trying to talk to the Conservation Commission about getting together a public stewardship program, where you would be like a trail stewardship program, where you would be involved as citizens in going out there and, keeping track of local assets and what kind of condition they're in, what kind of maintenance needs to be done. And once you get that established and you're talking to the Conservation Commission, you get more people involved, then you have more of a chance of being involved in the management of these areas and in the decisions, you know what I mean? So you get involved in the decision tree. So just, the more people you get involved, the better it is for everybody, so.
Case in point to the logging of softwoods in forest areas, as soon as I can find the other pictures from what it used to be, I have property up in Jefferson, New Hampshire, and in the river valley up there, and actually in that general area, there's a number of areas that this happened to last October. One in particular was actually a tree plantation that was planted 45 to 50 years ago. I'm not sure exactly what species, kind of looks like, they looked like red pines.
Probably.
They were all 16 to 24 inches diameter, nice straight, ready to be harvested. The October storm blew up through there last year and splintered every single one of those trees into toothpicks. That piece of property, 7.5 acres, had to be clear cut, chipped, and taken away. If you want to see a wasteland, you should see what's left there now, because of these 50 and 100-year storms that are happening 5 to 10 years apart.
Well, that's a lot of the conservation land we have in town, especially in the northern tier. We're town forests, and they were actively managed for decades. And the reason they're so healthy is because they were actively managed. We have other conservation lands in town that were agricultural lands that were grown up, that were, all pasture land. Those are all pasture pines and not a healthy woodland at all. And in order for it to get back, you either need to leave it for centuries or you need to get in there and manage it. So I think that's sort of the reality of.
The thing about softwood forests too, like they're basically determined forests.
Yeah.
That's the last phase of regrowth of the property. And the next phase is for the softwoods to die off.
And then hardwoods come up under.
And the cycle starts over
Right.
again, and like you say, it's 100 years.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the forest composition, or forest, kind of answer that with the
Yeah, I mean, geez, depends on where you are. I'd say 80% of our town, probably more so, was converted into agricultural land at the height of agricultural economy in the middle 1800s. And so most of our forests aren't much more than 120 years old.
But is it mostly softwoods, or is it?
All over the yard. So mixed hardwoods, softwoods, everything, yeah.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
All our trees are marked, the majority of them are the hardwoods. Because they're the higher value trees. So you leave a softwood forest.
If you want to see what the town looked like back 50 to 75 years ago, get a look at the aerial assessor's maps, and it's almost all open farmland.
Yeah,
The entire town.
even what's hanging there in Ritter, on the back wall of Ritter, yeah.
Correct picture is behind you.
Terrific, well, we have to wrap it up. We need to give the room over to the selectmen, so I'd certainly encourage you, if you have any additional information or feedback, would love to hear it. I am bkibbe@lunenburgonline.com if you want to send any of your comments directly to me. Otherwise, get in touch with Adam Burney and he can forward it over to us if you have any further thoughts or ideas. But really appreciate you guys coming out and listening and giving us some input. Appreciate it.
Thank you.